April 13th, 2019. Royal Randwick, Sydney, Australia. Winx walked onto the track for what the crowd knew might be the final time, and the sound that followed her was not the sound of an ordinary race day. It was louder than that, more emotional than that. Thousands of people had come to say goodbye to a horse who had turned winning into something that felt almost guaranteed, even though racing never guarantees anything. They wore her colors, blue with the white sleeves and the famous M on the cap. They held signs. They cheered before the race even began. Some came because they loved racing. Others came because they loved Winx. By this point, she had become bigger than the sport in Australia. She had won 32 races in a row. She had won 4 Cox Plates. She had broken records, carried pressure, and made elite horses look ordinary. She had become the kind of athlete people told their children about while she was still competing. But one race remained, the Queen Elizabeth Stakes, 2,000 meters at Royal Randwick. One final test, one final walk into the starting gate, one final chance for everything to go wrong. That was the thing people sometimes forgot. Winx made winning look easy, but nothing about her streak was easy. Every race carried risk. Every start gave another horse the chance to be the one that ended the story. A bad jump, a blocked run, a wet track, a rival having the race of its life, one small mistake from jockey Hugh Bowman, one moment where Winx did not produce the acceleration that had made her famous. Any of it could have ended the streak. And if she lost now, in her final race, the whole ending would change. The record would still be great. The career would still be legendary. But the perfect final chapter would be gone. Trainer Chris Waller knew the pressure. He had guided her from a talented but beatable mare into one of the greatest racehorses the world had ever seen. He had managed the expectation, the travel, the media, the fear of injury, and the strange burden of having a horse who was expected to win every time she appeared. Hugh Bowman knew the pressure too. He had been the rider trusted with the most famous horse in the country. Every time he climbed onto her back, he carried not just a saddle and a set of instructions, but the hopes of a nation that had fallen in love with her. Now, as Winx stood at the edge of her final race, the question was not whether she was already great. That had been answered long ago. The question was whether she could leave the sport untouched by defeat for the 33rd straight time. The gates opened. Winx settled into the race. She was not rushed. She did not need to be. That was part of her greatness. She did not have to lead from the beginning or panic when others moved around her. She had learned how to wait, how to relax, how to let the race unfold before unleashing the one weapon no rival had been able to match. Her turn of foot. That sudden, devastating acceleration. As the field moved through the race, the crowd watched with nervous excitement. They had seen this before, but that did not make it safe. Every Winx race had the same strange feeling. Confidence mixed with fear. Belief mixed with the knowledge that racing can be cruel. Then the moment came. Bowman asked her to go. Winx moved. In a few strides, the race changed. The familiar power appeared. The mare who had carried Australian racing for years began to sweep forward, and Royal Randwick rose with her. The crowd knew. The announcers knew. The horses around her knew. Winx was coming. Down the stretch, she surged into the lead and drove toward the finish line. For one final time, she was the horse they could not stop. She crossed the wire first, winning the Queen Elizabeth Stakes and completing the final race of her career. The streak was complete at 33 straight wins. Her record stood at 37 victories from 43 starts, including a world record 25 Group 1 wins, 4 Cox Plates, 3 Queen Elizabeth Stakes, and more than 26 million Australian dollars in earnings. She retired in 2019 as one of the greatest racehorses in history. But the story of Winx was not just about the number. It was about how a horse who lost early in her career became the horse nobody could beat for almost 4 years. It was about a trainer who learned how to manage greatness. It was about a jockey who had to stay calm while carrying impossible expectation. It was about a country that found a champion and refused to look away. This is the story of Winx, the horse who refused to lose for 33 straight races, how she went from talented but imperfect to nearly untouchable, how she became the first horse to win 4 Cox Plates, and why her final race felt less like a competition and more like a national farewell. Winx was born on September 14, 2011, in New South Wales, Australia. She was bred by Fairway Thoroughbreds and was the daughter of Street Cry, a world-class stallion who had already sired champions. Street Cry was also the sire of Zenyatta, the great American mare famous for her dramatic late-running style and near-perfect career. Winx's dam was Vegas Showgirl, a New Zealand-bred mare who brought her own quality into the bloodline. On paper, Winx had promise. But promise does not make a legend. Every year, talented young horses are born with good pedigrees, strong bodies, and high expectations. Most never become champions. Some win a few races. Some show flashes. Some disappear before the public ever knows their names. Horse racing is filled with maybes. Winx had to become more than a maybe. As a yearling, she was sold at auction for 230,000 Australian dollars. That was a serious price, but not the kind of number that automatically told the world she would become one of the greatest racehorses ever. She was bought by a group of owners that included Magic Bloodstock Racing, Debbie Capidis, Richard Treweek, and Peter Tighe. They sent her to trainer Chris Waller. At the time, Waller was already one of the top trainers in Australia, but even he could not have known what Winx would become. Great trainers can spot ability, but no one can fully predict a 33-race winning streak. No one can look at a young horse and know that one day crowds will fill grandstands just to say goodbye. Winx made her racing debut on June 4, 2014, at Warwick Farm. She won. It was a good beginning, but not yet a sign of the impossible. Lots of horses win their first race. Lots of horses look promising for a moment. What matters is what happens after that moment. Winx won again in her second start. Then she stepped up into better races and started to show the mix of talent and inconsistency that defined the early part of her career. She won the Furious Stakes as a 3-year-old, proving she could compete at a higher level. But she also lost races. She was not yet the unbeatable mare people remember now. That is important. Winx was not born into perfection. She had to grow into greatness. In the 2014 Flight Stakes, she finished second. In the 2015 Vinery Stud Stakes, she finished 5th. In the Australian Oaks, she finished second. These were not terrible results, but they showed that the future champion was still being formed. She had ability, but she was not yet putting everything together. Then came a turning point. May 16, 2015. Sunshine Coast Guineas. Winx entered the race as a talented filly whose career still needed direction. By the end of the race, something had changed. She produced a powerful finish and won in a performance that hinted at the monster she was about to become. That victory began the streak. At the time, nobody knew it. Nobody could have known that the Sunshine Coast Guineas would be the last time Winx ever entered a race without carrying a winning streak behind her. Nobody knew that every race after that would end the same way. But looking back, that day became the start of one of the greatest runs in horse racing history. After the Sunshine Coast Guineas, Winx went to the Queensland Oaks. She won again. This was her first Group 1 victory, and it showed that her late-running power could carry her over distance and against serious competition. The mare who had been good was now becoming dangerous. Waller and Bowman were beginning to understand what they had. But even then, the idea of 33 straight wins would have sounded impossible. In racing, long streaks usually end quickly. A horse wins a few races, then meets tougher company. A rival catches them. The track comes up wrong. The pace does not suit. The horse has an off day. The magic fades. Winx did not fade. In the spring of 2015, she won the Theo Marks Stakes, then captured the Epsom Handicap at Randwick. The Epsom was a major win because it came in a famous handicap race, and Winx did it with the kind of finishing burst that would become her signature. By now, the streak had reached 4. Then came the race that would begin her most famous chapter. The Cox Plate, October 24th, 2015. Moonee Valley. The Cox Plate is one of Australia's greatest races. It is run at Moonee Valley, a tight track where position, timing, and balance matter. The race has been won by legends. It is often called the Weight for Age Championship of Australasia. Winning it once can define a career. Winx was about to make it her race. In the 2015 Cox Plate, she did not just win. She destroyed the field, winning by nearly 5 lengths and setting a race record. It was the performance that announced her as something more than a rising star. She was now a champion. The streak had reached 5. But more importantly, Winx had found the race that would become part of her identity. In 2016, she came back better. She won the Apollo Stakes, then the Chipping Norton Stakes, then the George Ryder Stakes, then the Doncaster Mile, one of Australia's most famous handicap races. She was carrying weight, facing strong fields, and still producing that same finishing power. The streak was growing, and with it came expectation. Every start became an event. Fans began showing up not just to watch a race, but to watch Winx. Other horses were still entered, still prepared, still trying, but the energy around the race always came back to the mare everyone wanted to see. Then came the 2016 Cox Plate. If the first Cox Plate proved she was a champion, the second proved she was becoming a legend. Her main opponent was Hartnell, a talented Godolphin runner who had built his own strong season. Some believed he might finally push her. The race was set up as a true test. Winx had to defend her crown, and Hartnell was there to make it difficult. Instead, Winx made one of the best horses in Australia look helpless. She won by 8 lengths. 8 lengths in a Cox Plate. The performance was breathtaking. It was not only the margin, but the way she did it. When Bowman let her go, the race opened up like a door no one else could pass through. Hartnell chased, but he could not get near her. Winx had now won 2 Cox Plates. The streak was alive, and Australia was beginning to understand that it might be watching something historic. In 2017, Winx returned with the weight of a champion who was no longer allowed to have an ordinary race. That is one of the hardest things about greatness. Once people know what you can do, they expect it every time. A normal win can feel disappointing. A narrow victory can feel like a warning sign. Every race becomes a test, not just of ability, but of reputation. Winx handled it. She won the Apollo Stakes again. She won the Chipping Norton again. She won the George Ryder again. She won the Queen Elizabeth Stakes for the first time. Then later that year, she won the Warwick Stakes, the Chelmsford Stakes, the George Main Stakes, and the Turnbull Stakes. Some races were easier than others. Some gave fans a scare. But the result kept repeating. Winx won. Then came the 2017 Cox Plate. This time, the challenge was Humidor. Unlike the 2016 blowout, this race became a true fight. Humidor came after her in the stretch, and for a few seconds, the crowd had to wonder if the streak was about to end. Winx was still in front, but Humidor was closing. The finish came just in time. Winx won by half a length. It was her 3rd Cox Plate. She had matched Kingston Town, the legendary Australian champion who had won the race 3 times in the early 1980s. For decades, Kingston Town's Cox Plate record had stood as one of the great marks in Australian racing. Winx had now joined him, but she was not done. In 2018, the entire season pointed toward one historic goal: a 4th Cox Plate. No horse had ever done it. Winx began the year by continuing to win in Sydney. She took the Chipping Norton Stakes, the George Ryder Stakes, and the Queen Elizabeth Stakes again. Later, she returned in a race that had been renamed in her honor, the Winx Stakes, and won that too. She won the George Main Stakes and the Turnbull Stakes, extending the streak and setting up the race that would decide whether she could go beyond even Kingston Town. October 27th, 2018. Moonee Valley, the Cox Plate. This was not just another title defense. This was history. 3 Cox Plates had made her immortal. 4 would make her untouchable in that race forever. The crowd understood the moment. The pressure was enormous. Every rival wanted to be remembered as the horse that stopped her. Every fan wanted to see the impossible become real. Winx delivered. She won her 4th Cox Plate, becoming the first horse ever to win the race 4 times. That victory may have been the most important of her career, not because it was the most dominant, but because of what it represented. She had ruled the same great race for 4 straight years. She had beaten different rivals, different fields, and different versions of pressure. She had not simply stayed good. She had stayed great. By the end of 2018, Winx was no longer just Australia's champion. She was a global racing icon. International rankings placed her among the best horses in the world. She was recognized as one of the top turf horses on the planet, and in 2018 she was co-ranked as the world's best racehorse. But for all the global recognition, her story remained deeply Australian. Winx belonged to the crowds that packed Randwick, Rosehill, and Moonee Valley. She belonged to the fans who planned days around her races. She belonged to the people who wore her colors and held their breath every time Bowman waited before making his move. She became part of the national sporting memory. That is why her final campaign in 2019 felt emotional before it even began. Everyone knew the end was close. She was 7 years old, still winning, still healthy enough to compete. But no racehorse continues forever. Waller and her owners had to decide how to bring the story to a close without asking too much. The goal was not to stretch the streak until it broke. The goal was to let her finish on her terms. Winx returned in the Apollo Stakes at Randwick on February 16, 2019. She won and set a race record. Then she won the Chipping Norton Stakes for the 4th time. Then she won the George Ryder Stakes for the 4th time, handling heavy ground and still pulling away. That victory made the final race clear. The Queen Elizabeth Stakes would be goodbye. April 13, 2019. Royal Randwick. The crowd came not only for victory, but for farewell. They wanted one last run, one last Bowman ride, one last burst down the Randwick Straight. Winx had already given them more than they could have asked for, but now they wanted the perfect ending. The final race was not handed to her. Nothing in racing is. She had to run it. She had to find the same strength she had shown so many times. She had to hold together under the pressure of a packed track and a watching nation. And she did. Winx won the Queen Elizabeth Stakes for the 3rd time and extended her winning streak to 33 races. ABC described it as her final race before retirement, and her career ended with one last victory at Royal Randwick. After the finish, the emotion came out. Bowman saluted. Waller was overwhelmed. Fans cheered, cried, and tried to hold on to the moment. It felt less like the end of a horse's career and more like the closing scene of a national story. Winx retired with 43 starts, 37 wins, and 3 seconds. She had won her final 33 races in succession. She had captured 25 Group 1 races, which is listed as a world record. Her earnings were more than 26 million Australian dollars. She was Australian Horse of the Year 4 times. Those numbers are huge. But numbers alone do not explain Winx. To understand her, you have to understand the rhythm of her races. Winx was not always the horse in front early. She often settled behind the speed, sometimes far enough back to make people nervous. Bowman would wait, quiet and still, letting her find her rhythm. Around the turn, the tension would build. Fans knew the move was coming, but they never knew exactly when. Then Bowman would ask, and Winx would answer. Her acceleration changed races in a way that felt sudden and inevitable at the same time. One moment she was waiting. The next, she was sweeping past horses who had looked comfortable only seconds earlier. That was her magic. She made patience dramatic. That is one reason fans loved her so much. The race was never just a race. It was a performance with a familiar shape. The waiting, the worry, the move, the roar, the finish. Again and again, she gave people the ending they came to see. But the streak was not built on magic alone. It was built on management. Chris Waller and his team understood that keeping a champion sound is just as important as finding races to win. Winx was not raced carelessly. Her campaigns were planned. Her condition was watched closely. Her schedule, allowed her to peak when it mattered. The team did not chase every possible challenge just to prove a point. That restraint helped protect the story. Some people wondered why Winx did not travel more internationally. Others asked how she would have gone in Europe, America, or Dubai. Those questions are part of racing debate, and they will always exist. But Winx's team chose the path they believed was right for her, and the result was one of the longest and most successful winning streaks the sport has ever seen. It is hard to argue with 33. Her greatness was also tied to consistency. Many horses can produce one spectacular performance. Some can dominate for a season. Very few can keep returning for years and deliver every time the public expects it. That was Winx's real challenge, not just beating the horses in front of her, beating expectation. At first, she was a talented mare on the rise. Later, she became the horse who was supposed to win. That sounds like a compliment, but it is also a trap. When everyone expects victory, the pressure has nowhere to go but up. Every rival has nothing to lose. The champion has everything to lose. Winx kept carrying that pressure. The more she won, the more dangerous the next race became. A loss in the middle of the streak would have been shocking. A loss near the end would have been devastating. Yet the final chapter never broke. That is why the title fits. Winx, the horse who refused to lose for 33 straight races. It is dramatic, but it is also true. From May 2015 until April 2019, no horse beat her. She was challenged. She was chased. She was tested in close races and historic races. She ran on different tracks, at different distances, against different opponents, and under different conditions. The result stayed the same. Her legacy also grew after retirement. Statues were created in her honor. The Warwick Stakes was renamed the Winx Stakes. She was inducted into the Australian Racing Hall of Fame while still active, a rare honor that showed how important she had already become. As a broodmare, Winx entered a new chapter. Her first surviving foal, a filly by Piero, later became a major story herself, selling for 10 million Australian dollars at auction in 2024, before being retained by part owner Debbie Capitas. That showed how powerful the Winx name remained years after her final race. But no matter what happens with her offspring, Winx's racing legacy is already complete. She does not need another chapter to explain her greatness. The 33-race streak does that. The 4 Cox Plates do that. The final Queen Elizabeth Stakes does that. Her story is different from Black Caviar's. Black Caviar never lost in 25 starts. Winx lost early, then became unbeatable. That difference matters. Black Caviar's story is perfect from beginning to end. Winx's story is about transformation. She was not always untouchable. She became untouchable. That makes her rise feel earned. She lost before the streak. She improved. She matured. She found her style. Then she took over racing for almost 4 years. In that way, Winx's story is not only about perfection, it is about becoming. She became the horse people trusted. She became the mare who made crowds roar before she even made her move. She became the standard every Australian champion after her would be measured against. And at the end, she left exactly the way fans hoped she would. Still winning, still loved, still ahead. On April 13th, 2019, when Winx crossed the finish line at Royal Randwick, she did more than win another race. She gave her story the ending it deserved. Not every legend gets that. Some stay too long. Some lose the magic. Some are remembered with a little sadness because the final chapter does not match the peak. Winx gave racing the farewell it wanted. A packed crowd, a famous race, a final surge, a 33rd straight victory, then retirement. That is why people still talk about her with emotion. They did not just watch a great horse. They followed a journey. They saw the early losses, the rise, the first Cox Plate, the second, the third, the fourth, the world recognition, the farewell tour, and the final goodbye. Winx became a rare kind of champion, one who kept giving fans exactly what they came for: the horse who refused to lose, the mare who made winning feel inevitable, the champion who turned 33 straight races into history. And when she finally walked away, nobody had caught her.